Amen.
All right. So before I turn it over to Jenny, I wanted to introduce who she is a little bit. So Jenny Lamb is a licensed clinical social worker. She's worked in various community mental health settings for the last 11 years, so over a decade. She graduated from Columbia University with a concentration on mental health and the healthcare systems. She's currently working at the Department of Mental Health, providing consultations to the mental health providers in the wraparound program. She's been trained in cognitive behavioral therapy and uses this modality with her clients in the community and residential settings. So, without further ado, let me go ahead and direct all of our attention to Jenny.
Good morning, friends. Thank you for having me here again to speak on a topic that is highly being experienced by many people and something that we all want to avoid, which is being rejected. Rejection is a feeling that all of us have experienced sometimes, whether on a large or small scale in our everyday life. It actually ranks among the most distressing experiences of everyday events that people experience. The fear of being rejected can be such a painful, distressing, and sometimes traumatic moments, which cause most of us to do anything to avoid the experience, whether we know it or not. So let's try to understand rejection, the underlying need behind it, and how it can instill fear in us, and how we can handle rejection and move forward with it. There's so many different types of rejection, so let's take a look at some common types that we're already familiar with. Familial rejection is that typically happens during childhood when a child has been rejected at a very young age. And it may sound terrible when I say that, like, why would anyone reject a child? But that usually occurs between the child and their parents or caregivers. And usually this happens due to abuse, or when the parents or caregiver abandon the child, and also or neglect the child, and sometimes withholding love and affection towards the child. So on this slide, I have included a picture from a YouTube video called The Still Face Experiment, which is a 3-minute video that illustrates what happens when a mom does not smile or respond back to the baby. And as you can see, the baby started feeling distress, and eventually I think she started crying. So if you want to understand more about this familial rejection, I highly recommend watching this video. Another type of rejection that we're probably familiar with is the social rejection. Though this type of rejection usually occurs at any age, it can occur at any age. It usually starts during our childhood. And this type of rejection can include bullying and alienation, whether in school or our work environment, or in a social group setting. This kind of reminds me of the movie Mean Girls, when cliques are formed to alienate others that are less popular or less, dominant. Another rejection that we're probably also familiar with is rejection in a relationship. Being rejected by someone you asked out on a date, or rejection can also occur during in a relationship where an individual may refuse to share an event or experience or their friends and families with their partner, or they can treat their partner as if there was, if that person was no more than just a casual acquaintance. Breakups can also be another form of rejection in this category. Other types of rejection may include being denied of a promotion, or not being accepted to the school or job that you applied for. So while we named a few of these types of rejections, the common denominator to rejection is the same, which is the lack of need to feel accepted, belonged, or loved. Some may ask, are those needs even important? Because it's not as important as having food on the table or a job, right? Well, while our basic needs are essential for survival, the lack of need to feel accepted, belonged, or loved are also as important. Let's dig a little bit deeper into understanding where the roots of rejection comes from. And to understand the roots of the problem, let's take a look at our own human needs, or I like to call it underlying needs, because we all have them. Thanks to one of the most well-known American psychologists, Abraham Maslow, who created the Maslow hierarchies of needs, in which he explains our most innate human needs in priority, from our very basic physiological needs to self-actualization. Here is a pyramid of which Dr. Maslow created to explain our basic needs in that order. From the bottom up, you'll see that our physiological needs include oxygen, water, food, sleep, and then when our basic needs are met, the focus shifts to safety needs, which may include your health and your job, money, feeling safe in your home, your neighborhood, or even your country. After your safety needs are met, it shifts up to the community, love, and belonging needs. These needs are usually met by family, friends, romantic partners, and even your small group of community. After your love and belonging needs are met, the focus shifts to the esteem needs, which is when a person feels comfortable with what they have accomplished and want to be recognized, accepted, and respected. We hear the terms low self-esteem or low confidence a lot, which means the individual's needs to be accepted and respected are usually not recognized by either their peers or others or sometimes themselves. The last and highest level of this pyramid is called self-actualization, which according to Dr. Maslow is when a person reaches a state of harmony of how they feel towards themselves and also how they not only feel towards themselves, but how they feel towards their own image and really care less of how others see them. In order to get to this level, the esteem needs has to be met. So why is it so important to understand our underlying needs? Because as humans, our behaviors are driven by our needs. If one of these needs are not met, there's a disruption in our homeostasis, which is a level where we feel some kind of steadiness and balance. This disruption or destabilization of any of our needs in any level here can lead to severe physical or psychological effects in our bodies. If your basic need of oxygen is deprived, you will die in less than 5 minutes. If you don't have food for, I don't quote me, but I think more than 20 days, you will also die. What happens when you don't feel safe in your environment? What happens if you are, constantly watching in your back and you don't feel safe in your home? Our safety needs is an evolutionary need, which manifests to the fight, flight, or freeze response. This response is actually there to help protect us, especially when we are endangered. But what happens when it is constantly activated? Your body can overproduce stress hormones, and over a course of time, it can cause long-term side effects physically and psychologically to our bodies. So, what happens when our need to belong um, and need for acceptance and need to be loved are disrupted or destabilized? When we perceive being rejected and actually being rejected, we start to feel disconnected, alone, isolated, shame, guilt, and most definitely sadness, sometimes anger. Physiologically, the feeling of being rejected is very similar to the physical pain pathways in our brain. In some MRI studies, it shows that the same area of our brain becomes activated when we experience rejection as when we experience physical pain. This explains why rejection hurts so much. Because rejection is so painful and distressing, many of us tend to avoid it at all costs due to the fear of being rejected again. The fear of being rejected can be so traumatic to an individual, it can lead to avoidance, which is avoiding any kinds of situation, person, memories, or places that can trigger memories and negative emotions and thoughts that remind them of how painful it is. Avoidance behaviors can result in feeling shameful, useless, being discouraged, unworthy, disconnection, anxious, and eventually going back to not wanting to feel rejected. Not only will it lead to avoidance, but also sensitivity to rejection, which means the person can constantly look for signs that they're about to be rejected because of their fears and expectations. People with rejection sensitivity tend to misinterpret, distort, and overreact to what other people say and do. They also remain alert for more cues that they're about to be rejected. The fight, flight, freeze response system may be activated. If avoidance is the flight or the freeze, then rage would be the fight. Not everyone who feels rejected will avoid the situation. In fact, some people would respond in anger and rage. The long-term effects to rejection ranges from constant feeling the need to be liked, which is filling in that need that we talked about earlier, the need to belong, and the need to feel love and feel accepted. Having difficulty making connections with others, having interpersonal problems with friends, families, and significant others, to having to having like chronic depression, anxiety, and feeling loneliness. So, what do we do when we do feel rejected? How do we move forward? Well, the way we move forward with rejection, like any other problem, the first step is to acknowledge the problem. Call it out. Recognizing it is what it is doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. You are simply facing the problem, looking at it eye to eye. After acknowledging the rejection, acknowledge your emotions. By acknowledging the hurt, the shame, sadness, the disappointment, the embarrassment, the grief, you're also allowing yourself to process these feelings rather than sweeping it away. Oftentimes, we tend to sweep away these feelings, such as shame and embarrassment, because they're so painful um, to face and we don't want to deal with it. After you have acknowledged you've been rejected and the emotions that you're feeling, be kind to yourself. So many thoughts and emotions flood through our minds, and the last thing you want to do is to beat yourself up further. Practice some mindfulness and relaxation exercises. Take a walk or go for a run or have fun. Do something fun for yourself. Practice self-care. Also, talk to someone you trust, like your therapist or a good friend and family member, to help process your emotions. Journal, pray, or talk to yourself out loud are also ways to process your emotions. I like to talk in the car by myself. I highly encourage you to do both, processing your thoughts and emotions on your own or with God and with someone you trust, because processing with someone, especially a therapist, can help give you validation and another perspective, while processing alone can also allow you to ground yourself and perhaps understand why it hurts so much. Surround yourself with people who value and loves you. Go to your cheerleaders. As I mentioned earlier, after being rejected, negative thoughts and emotions can flood our minds, especially those negative thoughts about ourselves. Take time to notice these thoughts. Write them down. We want to be mindful of our thoughts because our thoughts can eventually lead us to our behaviors. There are actually quite a few videos from Anchor of Hope um, that has recorded regarding different types of cognitive distortions, which talked about the automatic thoughts in our minds and how it drives our behaviors. I highly recommend you go check it out if you haven't done so. If you want to understand more on how our thoughts can lead to our behaviors. As you process these emotions and thoughts, try to remember and understand that one of your needs to belong, to love, and need for the acceptance were destabilized or disrupted. Understand that your body and mind may be in shock and or hurt. So allow yourself to grieve. As you're processing, think of who, where, or what you've been accepted by. Just because you were rejected by someone or something, it doesn't mean you have been rejected um, by other people and have not been accepted by other people or entity. The opposite of rejection is acceptance. Acceptance means you are not avoiding the emotions and thoughts that come when being rejected. Acceptance means you are allowing yourself to go through it without feeling guilty. Acceptance is allowing yourself to understand that being rejected, whether in a situation or by a person, does not mean your need to belong or to be accepted are invalid. We are humans and we all have needs. Well, this brings it to an end of my talk on rejection. Before I say goodbye to you, I just wanted to remind you that no matter or whoever or whatever rejects you or don't understands your needs, we've got an amazing God who knows every single one of our needs and fears and will never reject us. Let's welcome our next speaker, Dr. Esther Park, to talk more on what God says about rejection. Bye for now, friends.
I feel like I've already been through a session of healing. already just listening to Jenny's soothing tone on this topic of rejection. So, like Jenny said, without further ado, I wanted to introduce Dr. Esther Park, who'll be sharing with us the spiritual aspect of rejection.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this privilege and opportunity to be with you on Saturday morning. And for those who are watching even afterwards, thank you so much. I'm going to present some thoughts about rejection with the lens of the gospel. So I'm going to share my screen. This screen here, the spiritual aspects of rejection. All right. I definitely grew up struggling with this topic. So why does the experience of rejection not feel so pleasant? And for some people, it hurts so much that sadness and anger can result. In life, we go through situations where we anticipate approval, where we seek acceptance, to be received, to be chosen. There is a suspenseful thought of, will I be rejected or not? And that question comes very often in various times of events or activities. For example, and all these examples, I have gone through every single one of them, asking that question. For example, when teammates are being picked, after party invitations are sent, or after the audition for the part that you wanted, or how about when going on an important job interview, or during a romantic date with someone you really want to like you back, running for office or position, and maybe applying for a college or graduate program. These are just few examples in everyday life that we anticipate. Will I get picked? Will I get rejected? Now, spiritually, we need to understand this word when it comes to understanding rejection. The word is righteousness. Rightness is to be right with somebody, to be right for something, to be accepted. It's as if having done nothing wrong and having done everything right. So after the fall in Genesis 3, all people, all of us are now restless and struggling for rightness, to live up to the standards and be acceptable and approved. We build our image and identity on something that makes us feel good about ourselves. And we cannot take rejection from things or authorities that are important to us. In the Bible, there are a few stories about rejection. Now, the first major serious one was Adam and Eve. They actually chose to reject God first and decided, we don't need you, God. We don't need your love. We don't need your protection. We could do it on our own. That was a very serious rejection. Another story is about Joseph, rejected by his 10 older brothers due to his own conceited personality. And another story is about the Samaritan woman at the well. And that was because of her colored and shameful past. Regardless of the cause, when being rejected as an outcast, the individual can certainly experience hurt and loneliness, like Jenny was mentioning. The rejections we go through in life are actually only a small sting compared to the problem of not being right with God. Our anxiousness or fear of not being acceptable or approved by the one whose opinion matters to us the most comes nowhere close to what our deepest and greatest fear should be, and that would be God's verdict. In Romans 3, there's no one righteous. It says no one can even cleanse his own sin. We are already born unrighteous ever since we spiritually inherited the original sin. And if sin is present, God cannot be there. It is unacceptable. It is actually despicable to him Unholiness and unrighteousness is the core of man's being. But did you know we weren't originally created this way? So that's why we all struggle for righteousness right now. Everyone is anxious due to fear of being seen for what we really are. Thus, we struggle with wanting acceptance from others and with self-acceptance, despite all my flaws. But here's the good news. When I desperately recognize that I am not right with God, when I realize my deepest issue is having been separated from God because of the original sin, when I accept and believe that Jesus as the Christ died in my place to remove that sin, then I become a child of God. 2 Corinthians 5:21 tells us, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So awesome. And when Jesus becomes your Lord and Savior, all your sin, original sin and the consequential sins of our life, are forgiven. And when he enters your heart, righteousness enters. When God sees you, he doesn't see the sin nor any of the flaws. He sees the righteousness of Christ. This is such a mystery I'm still trying to grasp. Then God's verdict now becomes as if you did nothing wrong and as if you did everything right, because Jesus' perfect righteousness has been imputed to you, has been applied to you. We learned a very fancy word today, imputed, imputation. With no effort on our own, God's grace is that Jesus did all the work so that we can fully be accepted and approved by God. So, what now? What should I remember? Please remember, I am now right with God. I am not rejected. I am firmly embraced by God. I am unconditionally loved by God. When I know that his opinion of me is what matters the most, I will not be affected by the apparent rejections from people or things of earth. I could even consider these kind of rejections as something not what God has in store for me, because he only wants the best. I may not think so at the time, but he has that great plan. You know, the woman at the well lived in shame and guilt as she endured society's rejection of her as a respectable and dignified woman. She was living with an unquenchable thirst for something to make her feel whole. As Jesus accepted her, first and offered the living water himself, she came to know that she is loved by the Creator and is fully accepted by God. Being approved by other people in the world around her no longer defined her identity. Now, what is the hidden blessing in all of this? Encountering Jesus transformed her to where she became a blessing to those who rejected her in the first place. John 4:39 records many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. Please guard against the enemy's lies, trying to deceive by making us think you're rejected because you're not good enough. Now, let's take a break and talk about that there are times when we are rejected in life, and it's for objective, reasonable reasons. For example, didn't get accepted to that program because your GPA wasn't the minimum required, or you didn't get that job position because you didn't have enough experience. They wanted you to have 2 years experience and you only had 1. Or you didn't get that loan because your credit is too low. Simple as that. But these reasons are these reasons of rejection are not a reflection of your status with God. So whether the legitimate rejection or not, Jesus lives in your heart and you have the righteousness of God and you are acceptable and approved. You are a precious child of God. Rather than misinterpreting the rejection as a measure of my worth, I need to understand that there may be an alternate detour that God has in mind. And He wants the best for me. God has a plan for all the momentary disappointments in life. Joseph in the Bible told his brothers, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Therefore, human rejection, it doesn't have to lead to feelings of devastation. My final encouragement for today is that when you experience the sense of being rejected, dejected, misunderstood, betrayed, or hurt by others, may these moments be a cue to remember the love of Jesus poured out to make you right with God again. And to know that Jesus fully knows our pain of being despised and rejected because He also experienced it himself in order to make us right with God. Mark 8:31 tells us, He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that He must be killed and after 3 days rise again. Before I close, I just want to ask God to bless us. Dear God, thank you for this message that Jesus, you were rejected, although you were fully righteous for the sake of saving us, so that we can be right with you again. Lord, during those times when we feel so hurt by others or by situations where we are rejected, help us to remember this message of how our greatest acceptance and approval is by you, and therefore we can be more objective in why we get rejected or betrayed or hurt by others on earth. Thank you so much for this promise. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Esther. All righty. Okay, thank you, Dr. Esther, and thank you, Jenny, again. I just wanted to take this time to remind everybody what our next Anchor of Hope is going to be before we head into our Q&A session. So our next Anchor of Hope is scheduled for Saturday, May 8th, and it's going to be on the topic of hatred. So please, I know that's Mother's Day weekend, I think, but please join us for our next Anchor of Hope. Okay, so at this time, my favorite time, actually all of it is my favorite time, but I'm going to open up our time to, pick the brains of Dr. Esther, Dr. Meejan, and Dr. Steve, our panelists. If there are any sort of questions, I know we've got a few shy people in here, no worries at all. If you have any questions and you're shy to share it with the group, feel free to chat me directly. I am here as Oak Health Foundation. But to get this started, let me go ahead and ask you guys this question, our panelists. What if someone believes it's their fault for being rejected often? And if we have a friend like that, or if that's us, like what can we say to somebody who is going through that kind of thought process?
I think yeah, they're already sensitive. They're already hurting because they were rejected. But you can kind of explore with them why they have those thoughts. What are your thoughts of why it was your fault that led to the rejection? And, are they accurate or not accurate? And what can we do about it? Just being supportive.
Like, would it be helpful enough to be like, it's not your fault?
We have to find out why they think it's their fault.
Mm. Any other thoughts, Dr. Esther, Dr. Mijin?
Often what we help our clients in this session, especially when we are internally going through the negative beliefs and the negative thoughts about myself. Right? So what we are trying to do is break the cycle of within the internal thoughts and emotion. We try to bring them out of their thoughts, right? So looking at the situation more objectively. So looking at the situation sometimes will help us to find the solution. Either we needed to improve in some way, if that is really is lacking of my own um, issues, then we can figure it out. Okay, in that situation, this and this, that maybe I can improve later. So the next time in the same situation, I don't have to be in the same spot, right? So our job again in psychology is breaking the cycle and help them to come out of it and looking at the situation rather than within themselves, because within ourselves we cannot find the answer, right? So I think that's something that I will say.
If somebody was mentioning a suspicion of it's my fault, there might be some awareness and good insight about that. And as we dig deeper, and if they're willing to decipher and discern what it is about themselves, to invite rejection, that sounds paradoxical, but for example, somebody may be rejected very often in their dating life. And if they're wondering, what is it about me, right? They may be a step closer to figuring out why they are getting rejected so often. Because if it is them themselves, for example, on dates, they just talk way too much, or they don't talk enough. They're so quiet, they look disinterested, or they don't have good hygiene, they smell all the time. So why would anyone ask you out again? Those kind of like external outside problems, but they can have better control of those things, then they might have more success and not being so rejected so quickly. So I think sometimes it's a good question for them to ask that. And if they were really insightful, wanting objective help from friends or therapists or outside people, then they might have better success. Somebody might say, I'm never going to get in grad school. Every time I apply, they don't like me. It's something about me. They don't like me, or they don't like the fact that I'm Asian, or some reasons like that. But it might just be they're always 2 points shy of that minimum GPA, and they just need to study more.
Definitely, I feel like it's like a fine line of it being like an unhealthy thought, but also you can use it for good to like find, ways to improve yourself, if anything.
Exactly. So I am not a mistake. If we are looking at it, it's my fault, it's because I'm a mistake, then there's no answer, right? But I made a mistake so that I couldn't get it, then I can grow and learn from it. So I think of those two. So if it is me, if I try to find me within myself that became my identity, then it will be very hard to find the answer again.
I know in Jenny's seminar, she was talking about rejection. Now, what do I do? And she kind of gave us, healthy methods to like process the rejection that you've already kind of gone through. Do you guys have any advice or tips about, is there like a good, healthy way to prepare for rejection? So like the front end more than the back end?
Wow.
Can you repeat that question? Like, to prepare for rejection?
Yeah. I don't know if that's even a thing, but I'm wondering, like, are there healthy ways to like
Mhm.
grow thick skin to handle rejection better, like to be prepared for it?
I think, go ahead, Dr. Steve.
I was just saying, I would follow like what Jenny said. It's like you have your coping mechanism if it happens, but you don't want to go into a situation already being like assuming or preparing that I'm going to get rejected. But if it does happen, you want to have your coping mechanisms, like Jenny spoke about, to deal with it.
I remember being very nervous for my medical school interview because I only had one interview. That it was going to be it. If I didn't do well in that interview and get into school, I wasn't going to go to med school because I already got rejected from all the other schools. They didn't even offer me any interview. In fact, they didn't even offer me a rejection letter to tell me I wasn't rejected. It was just like kind of ghosting me altogether. So when I went on that interview, of course, humanistically, I was very nervous. But to answer Donna's question using my example, I also was fighting that thought with replacing with the thought of, well, if I don't end up going to this med school, that doesn't mean my worth and my value in front of God changes. He would love me and accept me even if I was a doctor or not. So I had to focus on that truth and to realize this interview is to see if my career is going to be in medicine. If I don't get in, then I have to start searching again because that means I'm not meant to be a doctor. My career is not to be a medical doctor. So with those thoughts, it helped me to calm down so that I can do my best because the anxiety about rejection can make your performance very poor because you're just so nervous and on edge. And just like Jenny was talking about, the stress hormones just make you so hyper inside. I had so much peace that I was very shocked that I'm just so much peace. And it wasn't more like, I don't care, whatever. It wasn't that kind of peace. That's not really peace. That's more of a defense mechanism.
Mhm.
So long story short, I'm here now. So obviously I made it. But at that time, I had to come to grips of, well, if I'm not going to go and expect rejection, like Dr. Steve was saying, because I want to hope, I want to get in. But if I don't, I'll be okay too.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really hard question, Donna, actually. How can we prepare to be rejected? Right? We all wanted it to be accepted. And then with that hope, we are applying, we're going out, and we are trying to do something. So humanistically, it's a very, very difficult to be prepared for the rejection. But even if we can say, oh, I'm okay, I'm fine, but internally we know we are in pain. So like Jenny mentioned, the Maslow's hierarchy, needs of hierarchy, that is a human needs, love and belonging. How can we not be hurt when we are rejected? But even little kids, if my nephew say, "Oh, I don't want it to play with you," it hurt. Even just the little things like that, because we all wanted it to be accepted. But I think, like what Dr. Esther said, best way of preparing is really knowing that we are accepted by God, because humanistically, there's no other way that we can prepare. But believing that no matter what, we are accepted by God, that truth will truly will set us free. Other than that, I don't think that there is no answer um, to find.
I think also, just to piggyback on all of that, it's like what's my will and what's God's will, because like Dr. Esther said, um, God's will is more important, in our lives as Christians. And if we get rejected in a certain situation, maybe that's just what I wanted, but not what God wanted. And like Joseph said in the Bible, like Dr. Esther said, it's like you may have rejected me with your motives, but God had a bigger plan for
Mm.
my life. And so just trusting in the Lord that our identity is safe with Him and He loves us, um, that will help us through rejections.
Yeah.
Amen.
Seriously, thank you guys so much. I guess that question stemmed from maybe that's like the avoidance part of rejection. Like I don't want to feel the pain of rejection, so how do I better prepare for it? You can't. Rejection is a way of life, a part of life. Awesome. I want to ask a kind of slightly different question. Jenny's opened up her seminar about like the different types of rejection that people experience in life, and one of them she talked about was like familial rejection, right? Or even I think it was familial, and it was like in relationships. So like for kids, I'm thinking of children who experience that form of either familial rejection from their parents, or even like kids who are bullied, in their early childhood. Would you guys say that the effects, like the negative, like effects of like childhood rejection, is something that that person has to kind of live with like their entire life?
I think they live with the after effects,
Mm-hmm.
where they'll be struggling with trust or maybe anger issues, and so that's where they'll go get help,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can kind of trace it back to like the childhood. So like parental rejection definitely is very hard, for children, and at some point it maybe be like some form of abuse even.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as mental health professionals, we kind of help the families recognize that and then deal with it and then um, make adjustments so that things can improve.
The answer to your question, Donna, is yes. It can go very, very far into their future and their adulthood. And if it's not recognized as something that affected them from a young age and it's still with me today, I need to deal with this and process it and heal from it, then it could affect other relationships. So those who were rejected by their parents or mistreated sometimes can do the same to their children because they never understood how to embrace and love unconditionally their own children. So it could affect all areas of their adult life as well. And there is hope though, right? We don't want to end it like this. Like there is hope for those who wonder, where is this coming from? Is it from my childhood? And of course, we who are on this panel who help children and adolescents, we would tell those adults, yes, and then try to trace it back like the way Dr. Steve mentioned.
So according to the information processing theory, the reason why a childhood and those experiences are very, very important, and it can also affect their adulthood later too, is because once they are receiving some negative experience in their childhood, if anything similar or related to it, they will adopt it or receive it very quickly without even thinking, as if that is a norm to them. But if opposite from that situation, if somebody give them love or somebody give them attention, it's not easy to accept or receive the process easily. So it is more of within our own brain, we are rejecting the positive or opposite from what we experience in the childhood. But even if sometimes the positive things is lingering outside, but anything the negative happen, that negative things win and then entering into the brain, right? So that's the part of the processing, the information processing theory. So according to that, yes, we're just to have more vulnerable and easy to adopt what we experienced. So if we experience more accepted and validated and connected in childhood, that will be more familiar to be accepted and more, right, rejected and negative things. But if it is opposite, it will be much harder for them, even if they experience some positive in adulthood. So obviously it will be harder when they experienced more of a rejection and more of a negative experience in relationship in their young childhood.
Bad. But I'm hearing though, I think with like the right guidance and like the right people, like even those like negative effects from like childhood bullying or rejection, there's hope for people to like start forming the healthier connections to the positive whatever, right?
Right. So the consistency is a very, very important, right? So not a one or once in a year or once a couple month kind of things, but it's a consistent. This is the reason why knowing gospel and enjoying God's love consistently is so important, because sometimes the humans in our relationship cannot feel that void, the need of our acceptance and significance. But right, is God is the only one who is constant and consistent throughout our lives, regardless of our own unfaithfulness, regardless of our inconsistency. So if knowing and experience that God's consistent love and unconditional love every day, and that became a power within ourselves, it will definitely will help to overcome much better way, I believe. So I think the more we're talking about this, without gospel, always we will experience a limitation, even in that regard.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So, in the history of all of our Zoom Anchor of Hopes, I've never had a person who told me that they're not shy to actually ask their own question. But I have somebody who wants to ask their own question. So, you know who you are. I'm going to have you unmute and ask this it's a two-part question that this person has for us. So, take it away.
I'll ask the question myself. It's easier than typing. So since Jenny brought up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I had a question regarding that. Is it possible to reach our full spiritual potential? And this is all on the caveat that Maslow is correct, that if he is correct, is it possible for us to meet our full spiritual potential if those basic physical needs from the first two levels of his pyramid aren't met? And the second part of that is often when those physical needs in this world, like food, relationship, sex, whatever, are not met, it feels like a rejection from God, that he's not meeting these basic needs. So how would you address someone who is having thoughts and feelings like that?
Very good question. They're both so deep. I have to replay it in my mind right now. Of the first question, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that all the time, because the spiritual is a different realm altogether from the physical. And so there are those who, and also, by the way, the full spiritual potential, that can't happen until we actually reach heaven and our spirit is separated from the vessel of the mind, flesh. That's going into a whole different topic. But in terms of, and the other reason is there are people in life who did not have some of the lower levels of that pyramid met, but they're filled with the Holy Spirit. And one example is Apostle Paul. Many, many times, none of those were being met. And yet he was filled with the Holy Spirit to keep trusting and depending on God and wherever he's at. The second question, I will let the others try that.
What was the second question?
The second question was basically a lot of times it can feel that God is rejecting us if he doesn't meet these more basic fundamental needs, like the bottom two rungs of Maslow's hierarchy. So how would you, if somebody is feeling rejected by God because one of those things is not being met, one of those needs on his hierarchy are not being met in this world, what would you tell to that person if they're thinking that God is rejecting them in some way by not meeting those needs? Again, this is all based on the belief that Maslow is right, which I'm not saying he is, but
Right, right.
yeah.
While maybe Dr. Steve and Dr. Esther think a little bit more, one thing that I could say is oftentimes when we are resentful toward God or complaining to God that our needs are not met, then I believe order is a shift. If that needs that what we need physical become the first priority, then obviously, right, is we will complaining to God. But the order has to be God first. Again, if we're putting the meaning in the money, and then when we don't have a money, probably we'll complain to God. So again, we are focusing on the source that we don't have, materials that what we're looking for that we don't have, rather than who is giving that to us. So that order, because the order has a shift, we will have a resentful toward God. So hopefully it makes sense. So I think we talked about it a couple Anchor of Hopes ago, that if anything that we are putting meaning and priority into, that if this word or somebody take that away, we will feel pain, we will feel suffering, then obviously we will look for somebody or something to be blamed, which is God. So I think it is order issues, that what we are putting order into that make us, blame God.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful, assuming that it's God who's rejecting us, that's causing us to not have those basic needs being met. So when it comes to those kind of spiritual topics, um, I think like we learned today, like we're fully accepted by God, fully loved by him. Yeah, sometimes as a parent, like he may have to discipline us, but that doesn't mean he's rejecting us. So we have to be careful with that thought that God's rejecting me, and that this is why this is happening.
I would probably also review if that person is inclined to understand more of the spiritual truths of what happened to us, where we even have the struggle of meeting basic needs, and go all the way to the problem of finance and health and family strife, right, societal issues, to go back to, because of the original rejection of Adam and Eve to God, and how that brought in the sin into the world, and we're living in a messed up place where working to eat basic needs and all those things, where did that come from? And bringing it to the good news of why Jesus had to come down and restore all things through his work on the cross. And at the end of the day, at the last day, all of that will be restored and everything will become whole again, and those things will not even be a need anymore. So I probably would kind of review the whole thing like that.
Yeah, and then we know now, most of us are adult here. Hopefully we're all adult, mentally and physically. We all know that there's no full satisfaction, even if our needs are met, right? So if we are looking for enough money to buy something, so you buy it, then how long that satisfaction will last, right? So even a relationship, right? Even if you are very excited and passionate about it in the beginning, but it will fade away too. So if we are putting or looking for the satisfaction from that material things in the world, we will never be met of our needs. So that's why I think I mentioned the order. So we needed to recognize and accept that nothing can satisfy us fully and bring or help us to have full contentments. So I think that reality, the fact we needed to accept.
And then if you think about, spiritually, and then the pyramid that we reviewed today, it's like people actually purposely deny themselves food, when they're fasting. So those needs are technically not being met, but you're doing it in order to focus spiritually and to seek an answer from God, or to get focus in a certain spiritual aspect of your life. Even Jesus fasted about 40 days, 40 nights.
So it sounds like Maslow's hierarchy would be significantly different if he was a Christian.
I believe so. I believe so.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank
Thank
you
you, Nick, for sharing your questions.
I love it. I hope we have many more not shy participants in our future Q&A sessions.
Great question.
Yeah, great question. And I think like even Dr. Esther, what you're saying, the spiritual, you can't compare it to like a physical needs hierarchy,
Yeah.
because like even in the Bible, you see so many examples of, people who definitely were not experiencing fulfillment of like the bottom two tiers. You find people who are in danger and not in a safe place, or, whatever, but there's still worship in those, in those situations. So there's definitely something that I think what Mick said was totally right. If Maslow was Christian, I wonder how his hierarchy would have changed. But awesome. I'm looking at the time, and I think now would be a good place to stop for today's Anchor of Hope. So everybody remember, the world may tell you in many different ways that you are rejected, but if you are a believer of Christ, you are beyond accepted. Jesus went through the ultimate form of rejection so that we can confidently say that we are accepted. So I hope you guys all have a wonderful last week of April. And the next time we see you, it will be May. So again, remember Saturday, May 8th, we're going to talk about hatred. So I know we're not all angels in here. We all have hatred towards something. So let's talk about that next Anchor of Hope. So thank you so much again, Jenny. Thank you, Dr. Esther and Dr. Meejan and Dr. Steve. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Wonderful weekend.
Wonderful weekend.